In the political criminal justice system, the American people are represented by several equally important groups. An informed citizenry, including scholars, historians, lawyers, investigative journalists, and everyday civic-minded Americans who investigate, document, and report crimes committed by the president. An Office of Special Counsel, which investigates crimes committed by the president and recommends indictment. The House of Representatives, which impeaches or indicts the president for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the Senate, which acts as a jury to convict and remove the president. These are their stories.
Get ready for impeachment.
Time now for Law and Order. Get ready for impeachment. Joining us now, former House member from here in New York, Elizabeth Holtzman. She also was on the House Judiciary Committee that voted for impeachment of Richard Nixon and ultimately led to his prompt resignation not long thereafter. Congresswoman, how are you today?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you, and it's great to be with you and your listeners.
Right.
How are you?
I'm good. Always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.
We listed in the opening all the different entities involved in this, and we may need to add the Southern District of U.S. Attorney's Office or the Southern District Court here in New York. But I'll ask you about that in a moment. I want to start about just talking about Comey. First of all, in general, your reaction to some of the things he has been saying in general.
Well, I mean, I think obviously he's trying to defend his actions. They're highly questionable. I mean, I think obviously he and his office, after a careful examination, determined that there was no crime or likelihood of a crime that Hillary Clinton engaged in with respect to the emails. And then he went ahead and announced just before the election, 10 days before, that he found more emails and he was going to investigate them. You know, it's prime governmental Department of Justice policy that you don't do something that's going to affect the outcome of the election. Mm-hmm. If he felt he had to commence, personally, I think he should have waited until after the election so that it took place so that he could then do the investigation. If it turned out, what he said was he had to make it public because if it turned out that she had in fact committed a crime, he would be responsible for electing an illegitimate president. Well, that's not really true. We have a system for dealing with that, which would be either the 25th Amendment. She could resign if she'd been elected, or maybe he was wrong in terms of his determination she'd committed a crime. Maybe she would be exonerated by a jury. Mm-hmm. So, you know, for him to have made that judgment and affect the outcome of the election, I think was just wrong. I think he was trying to justify himself to the Senate and the House because he'd promised them that the investigation was over. I don't know what was in his mind. I also think it's kind of unseemly for him at this point when investigation is ongoing to be calling the president names. I'm not a fan of this president. I think every name he's called him is deserved and more. But it's just, at this point, I don't know that it serves any purpose, and it's just a sad commentary. I think he's an honest person. I don't think he's got evil motives. I think he's trying to be honest with himself and the public. I just don't think he is, in fact, being completely honest. This was the wrong thing to do, and he made a huge mistake. And the country's paying a price for it. Terrible price.
Well, I agree with you. I think he's honest about what he did. I don't think he's being honest with himself or that self-aware of what it looks like. For example, he's also said that he does not believe in impeachment, that the people should stand up and let their voices be heard. But he doesn't realize by saying that, as you just explained, he didn't afford Hillary Clinton that same courtesy. He felt like he had to get in the middle of it so she wouldn't be illegitimate. But the people would have voted then, just like they would vote Trump in or out. So it's sort of a double standard when it comes to the female candidate versus the male candidate. Honestly, to me.
Well, yes, and first of all, I think that he's completely wrong about impeachment. He said, as I understand, and maybe I'm wrong in this, he said that the American people voted him in, so therefore their only remedy is to vote him out.
Right.
In other words, cut off your nose to spite your face. I mean, we're going to be punished. I mean, first of all, most Americans didn't vote for him.
Correct. That's true. That's true.
So why are we being punished? The Constitution permits this impeachment as a remedy because they think that the framers of the Constitution thought it was too harmful to have a president sit in office, a rogue president who's violating the Constitution, to sit in office until the next election. So I don't think that he's got I mean, that's just absurd to say that a mechanism that the framers afforded to the people to preserve our democracy shouldn't be used. That's number one. But secondly, the other thing, talk about a double standard, he didn't mention that Donald Trump was under investigation. Suppose it turned out that Trump had been colluding with the Russians in fact a criminal way. We know that his campaign tried to collude with the Russians. We don't know all the information, so we don't know whether a crime was in fact committed.
Right.
But we know there was some kind of collusion going on. Why wasn't that brought to the attention of the American people? So there definitely was a double standard. Both candidates had questions raised, but he only raised them about her, and I think that was really improper. And as I said, the country is paying a huge price. The world is paying a price for this man.
Congresswoman Holtzman, you mentioned, though, that he'd announced Donald Trump was under investigation. So I'm a little fuzzy on that. Was he, in fact, under investigation? He should have been.
Well, let's put it this way. There was not a criminal investigation at that point. There was what you'd call a counterintelligence investigation, which was designed to determine whether the Russians and the campaign were colluding. I guess ultimately it could have turned into a criminal investigation if they'd found collusion, but it started as a counterintelligence investigation because they were getting reports and they knew that there had been contact, they meaning the FBI and maybe other government agencies, were getting reports that Trump, people associated with the Trump campaign, had various contacts with the Russian government and Russian intelligence agencies. And so there actually was what I would call a counterintelligence investigation. I don't know whether they had specifically Trump as a target, but his campaign definitely was part of that investigation. And so there was an investigation of his campaign and the contacts with the Russians. And that should have been made public if he was making public the information about Hillary Clinton and his investigation of her, then that should have been made public too. I don't think either should have been made public, frankly, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But they should definitely, if they were going to make one public, if Comey was going to make one public, he should have made both public. It's not fair. It wasn't right.
Well, even in terms, what is also disturbing, Congresswoman Holtzman, is that his take on there shouldn't be impeachment and what have you, the American people voted him in when they really didn't. The question becomes whether or not he would have continued any sort of counterintelligence investigation or any sort of criminal investigation after Trump was in office. In other words, Trump fired someone that, frankly, I'm not convinced was going to do anything to Donald Trump.
I don't know about that. That I don't know. They actually did have the investigation going. It was ongoing. It was ongoing at the time that Trump was meeting with him and trying to get his loyalty and trying to tell him to hold off about Flynn, because they were now finding out that Flynn, his national security advisor, was lying about contacts with the Russians. Mm-hmm. They knew he had contacts with the Russians, they meaning the FBI, but Flynn was lying about it. And so that, of course, raises more suspicion. So they were still in the process. They hadn't given up by any means. In fact, they were in the process of investigating when Trump called on Comey to drop the investigation and to say that he was not under investigation. And Comey said, I can't say you're not under investigation because the minute you personally are under investigation, if I would have to announce that, and we don't do that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But he did that with regard to Hillary.
Yeah, he did, and that's
which is really awful. I don't know why I'm laughing about it. It's just you know, I think he believes himself to be an honorable man. And I know many people who know him, and people who used to work for me when I was DA, and think he was an honorable man. But
right.
You know, he made very bad judgments here, really bad judgments, and we're paying a terrible price. And by the way, when he says the American people elected Donald Trump, the other thing is not only that more Americans voted for Hillary than voted for Donald Trump, but we don't know to this day what impact the Russian interference had on the election. Remember, we're only talking about 80,000 votes, and the Russians were incessantly demonizing Hillary, organizing rallies against her, putting out false information. 80,000 people out of all the millions who voted. Could that have been a result of the Russian elections? Interference? Of course it could have been. Nobody's measured that, by the way.
Right. Good point. Former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman was last point on Comey, just in terms of this whole thing. Well, I had a point, and I'm having a senior moment. It left me. Maybe it'll come back to me. But no, your point is well taken. It wasn't the same with Hillary, and he put that out there. Now, is there anything in what this book reveals that we really don't already know that you think could impact the Mueller investigation? Anything new that you're gleaning from this that we, haven't already foreseen? I mean, he's acknowledged himself there may be obstruction. We believe there's obstruction, obviously, even in terms of his firing. But is there anything else that has crossed your eye to strengthen the obstruction case or any other part of the Mueller investigation?
Well, from what I've read, I don't think so.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is, I'm sure that he has been fully debriefed, not only in terms of the book, but fully personally debriefed by the Mueller people. So I think whatever he and probably even people on his staff have in terms of information, they've given to Mueller. And I think I think there is a potentially very strong case here for obstruction of justice because Donald Trump, I know Alan Dershowitz says the president can't commit a crime, but Alan Dershowitz is wrong. He was my professor at Harvard Law School, but he's wrong about this because the president can commit a crime. Richard Nixon was named an unindicted co-conspirator. The grand jury wanted to indict him, and the framers of the Constitution have never said one word in the Constitution or elsewhere that a president couldn't be prosecuted in office. A president can commit a crime, and the minute we say that a president, because he's president, can do anything he wants with impunity, that means we're on the way to dictatorship, which is something the framers never intended.
So, just to go back over the history a bit, he was an unindicted co-conspirator. The grand jury wanted to indict him. Why did they not indict him?
Well, they didn't indict him because Leon Jaworski, who took over as special prosecutor after Archibald Cox was fired, said president can't be indicted. So therefore, grand jury, we'll allow you, if you want, you can name him as an unindicted co-conspirator, but we'll turn over the impeachment materials to the House Judiciary Committee, which was conducting impeachment inquiry at that very time. The problem, though, with Jaworski's decision is that people on his staff told him that decision was wrong. But the reason also that it's not really relevant at this moment is that at that time, when Cox was fired, I was there. When Cox was fired, that's when the House Judiciary Committee got itself into action, geared up, hired counsel, and started its inquiry. We have nothing going on now in the House of Representatives in terms of an impeachment inquiry. And indeed, the House Intelligence Committee shut down its work. It said it's finished everything. Mueller hasn't finished, but they've finished. And it's nonsense because the Democrats on the Intelligence Committee say, of course, they haven't finished their work. They haven't interviewed. They have a whole list of witnesses that the House Intelligence Committee has refused to interview. Plus, the other thing is that before the House Judiciary Committee even started, the Senate Watergate Committee held public hearings. So the public is really uneducated and uninformed compared to where they were during Watergate. But the point is now, if Mueller, well, the point we were talking about, I just want to go back to that, is somehow that a president can't be charged with a crime in office is just wrong. It's just wrong. And if we take that point of view, then we're going down the road to dictatorship. The second thing is the president, if Mueller takes that point of view, if Mueller says, well, you know, let's do what they did in Watergate because that worked, it was a proper process, nobody complained. I mean, I think we did it the right way. The difference is that you had a House of Representatives that was in an impeachment inquiry. If Mueller decides that he's not going to prosecute, he's just going to issue a report, then who are they turning the materials over to? They can give a roadmap, but it's like going into a black hole, a cyberspace. There's no committee to receive it. There's no committee that's going to act on it. That was turned over. The materials were turned over to us. The committee had already been in its inquiry mode for months.
Is there anything in this Southern District case, which is a whole nother thing now, and the White House seems very worried about, is there anything in that well, let's put it this way. If you were on the House Judiciary Committee again, if you were a member of Congress, and even though the special prosecutor's portfolio is really, only supposed to consist of Russia and collusion, as a House Judiciary Committee member, would you still be interested in this Southern District case and Michael Cohen?
Sure, because it also may reveal the issue of collusion. Remember, one of the most interesting things that happened last week kind of got buried, is because of all the other news about Stormy and the court case in the Southern District, is that the McClatchy, which is a very highly respected news organization, reported that the special counsel has information now that Michael Cohen, Trump's fixer, personal lawyer, was in Prague, and when he said he'd never been there.
Right.
And so if Michael Cohen was in Prague, that despite saying he'd not been there, even though we don't know who he met with, that's a huge break in the case and could establish the collusion. So yes, there could be evidence that would be key the collusion in the papers that were found.
Indeed.
And so the that's very, very important. And I think who knows what we're going to find from this. I mean, they're fighting this tooth and nail, so the suggestion, the sense that I have is that they've got something they want to protect and something they want to hide.
Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, always a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, as always, for joining us. And I know we'll be talking again as this continues to develop. We appreciate your history and expertise, okay?
Thank you.
All right. God bless you. Enjoy your day. Folks, if all minds are clear, it has been made plain.